Trivia Crack is a game that is similar to Trivial Pursuit. In Trivial Pursuit, players roll dice and are asked questions of different categories. In Trivia Crack, players spin a wheel and answer a question from the category the spinner landed on. Once a player answers three in a row, they're able to attempt to answer a question to win a character. The goal is to obtain all six characters before your opponent. If so, you win. Before I get into the affinity spaces that I discovered related to Trivia Crack, I want to talk about my experience playing the game first, because that's really what drove me into choosing Trivia Crack for the Affinity Space project to begin with. I thought Trivia Crack was a basic game with one objective, but I was wrong. It's actually way deeper than that. There's way more that you can get into. So, first of all, here's an example of some of the questions that you could experience. Some of them were easy, some of them were hard, some of them shocked me. Some of them I answered wrong on purpose just because I could. Some of them I didn't agree with the correct answer, as I didn't feel that they were accurate descriptions, and some of them were just funny. Outside of just answering questions to win the game, there were three other, sub games or games within the games that were a lot of fun. There was this thing called Trivia Rush, where you tried to answer how many or build a streak of a lot of questions in a row. Played it once, I didn't like it. Treasure hunts, those were a bunch of fun. It was a mad dash to complete each objective or aspect of the treasure hunt to unlock coins and win a bunch. And there was a time limit on them, so you were just playing the game constantly, working really fast at all times. Missions were my favorite, as they ended up driving my gameplay choices because I was really into the incentive or the reward for completing a mission, thousands upon thousands of coins. So I would, open up multiple games at a time, trying to complete all the objectives of these missions to win coins so that I could further my status within the game. I became obsessed with wanting to get all these coins so that I could get gems, so I could buy cards. And that was something else that I grew obsessed with after just trying to win or lose, as I kind of became OCD, trying to collect all the cards, so I could have an entire baseball card collection. But eventually, I stopped playing. Why? Well, a little bit more on that when we get into the subreddit and the affinity spaces that I discovered. But a new feature was introduced that completely turned off my gameplay. So one of the first affinity spaces that I searched out for Trivia Crack was the Reddit, or I guess you could say subreddit for it. So I had been a Reddit user really just to look at NBA trade deadline things and just some general sports fan commentary, but never for the purpose of looking for a game. So when I discovered the Trivia Crack subreddit, one of the first things I looked for kind of was just how many participants were here. It ended up being around over 700. So not too bad there as far as the type of engagement that I could have. But I also noticed activity as far as when I would ask a question or when somebody would ask a question to when a response was. It really kind of depended on how long it took somebody to answer, depending on and if there was any major updates to the game that people maybe had some feedback on or to talk about. But one of the other things that I really focused in on was the rules, because as I started to be a lurker and browse through the different questions and things or little topics that were already out here, was that you saw pretty much everybody was engaging very civilized. There wasn't anybody on here flaming anyone for any different things. It really was all polite. But then I looked at the rules, and that's pretty much why. Profanity was excluded, calling it other people out and singling them out wasn't okay. But one of the big aspects I kind of found was the idea of posting hacks or cheating not being allowed. So that kind of spawned something for me to look at a little bit later. But the overview, outside of that, the subreddit for Trivia Crack was really just a polite environment for interaction and asking questions about the general gameplay requirements and different ways people had experienced or accomplished things within the game. So as I started out as a lurker, after just playing the game for a while, one of the first things I kind of really wanted to know about was what were these cards that I saw advertised throughout the game, and what were these little gemstones that you could accumulate? How did that all or how did that all work out? So one of the first things, when I looked at this, I found this topic for about an Easter machine, because apparently the Trivia Crack, they pose special machines around holidays. So when I went in here, it was just like, okay, what is a machine? I can't think I've ever encountered one. Well, little to my knowledge, I actually had. I just didn't realize what it was because there wasn't a tutorial that explained what the purpose of that and or what that aspect of the gameplay was. So luckily, somebody clarified that this was the dispenser where you actually get new cards. So at this point, I realized that the little cards, once I read them, they had power-ups. You got more lives for gameplay. You could win gems. You could get more coins, which you could use to take away answer choices when you're competing in the game and things. So I realized, wow, these cards were actually pretty important. So the next thing I wanted to look for was, continuing off of those cards and collecting them all within the game, is how do you get the most gems? Because the different cards themselves would cost a certain amount of gems. Well, how do I accumulate those? So I knew that, you could get them for gameplay, but then there's also this little free spin machine at the end of each turn that you could click or spin to be able to get a reward, whether it was gems or hearts or coins. And that was, you find out that's really the easiest way to get there. And this kind of frustrated me because, for winning a single game of Trivia Crack that you may play for an hour back and forth with somebody, you got like 300 coins. And coins really didn't do anything except for really just give you an extra life or allow you to filter out answer choices during a game. But they didn't help you acquire cards. The only way to do that was gems. So you either had to answer 50 correct questions to get a single gem, or rely on this free spin thing feature at the end of a turn to hopefully get 1 or 3 gems. So I kind of was posing that I wish Trivia Crack would allow you to kind of customize your own reward structure for winning games. So after that point, I was like, okay, well, another aspect of the game that I really like is missions. Missions were basically tasks that you had to complete in order to obtain a lot of coins. And once again, not just like 300 coins, but 10,000 coins at a time, which could be used to buy extra lives, buy correct answers in the game if you missed and you were worried about, ending a game streak. But I started to ask everybody, because the missions are optional, like, how do you interpret those? What do you feel like is the best way to play those? Or do you even, play them at all? Because one thing I noticed for me was that every time I saw a mission pop up, my, gameplay strategy changed. I would open up 10 games at once to play against a bunch of different people just so that I could, try and complete the mission. And the mission, each individual mission might be like obtain 10 characters in the entertainment category, or answer 50 questions right in the sports category, play 75 turns, in classic mode. And all of these things, they took time back and forth, but they gave you a lot of coins. So I would end up opening up all these games and not necessarily worrying about, getting answers correct always necessarily, and which would then, cause my individual scores, my individual ratings to go down. And it was just because I was trying to chase coins, and accumulate all these coins. So I inquired to the group, here, how everybody interprets those missions, how they play them, and if it even has any effect on their gameplay at all. One of the other things that came up throughout the game was the idea of bots, or playing against artificial competitors. So I mentioned a second ago, when I would open up 10 games at once, trying to accumulate a lot of coins or, complete a mission, I would notice that I would, all of a sudden play a bot that would constantly be answering questions immediately. AKA, like if I think about it in real time, it was my turn to answer and I missed a question. And then it would go to, the other player's turn. And within 10 seconds, I would get feedback saying whether they answered correct or incorrectly. And that just seemed really, really crazy to be playing the same person and get that quick of a feedback. Because I know, when I would get notified that it was my turn, sometimes I would respond within a couple minutes. Sometimes I wait 2 hours to answer another question. So it seemed really interesting on how, bots maybe interacted. So I did some searching and come to find out that a lot of people had experience and concerns with playing against the artificial bots as well, and how it affected their gameplay, their goals, and what they were trying to do. So that was another another interesting aspect that I learned along the game. One of the last straws, though, that I had with Trivia Crack, as when I say last straws, considering I don't play it currently anymore, was about 2 weeks ago. This power up or card came into play called Never Lose Another Game. And what it allowed you to do was spend money to buy these right answer power ups. So that way, when you opened up a question and you didn't know the answer, you could just use that and it would automatically answer the question correctly for you. I did not appreciate that. And for me, that was kind of a last straw within Trivia Crack, just because it made no sense at all. Why have any type of a game that's competition based where somebody can just pay their way for victory? I didn't like it. And once this came out and I read through this thread and contributed to a couple times, I can tell you that I used the 2 free power-ups, and then I never used or never engaged in Trivia Crack again, just because it seemed pointless to play a game against competitors where they could just cheat their way to a victory every single time. Outside of the Reddit for Trivia Crack, a couple other Infinity spaces and resources that I looked at for information on the gameplay and to engage with other users. One of which I sought out here for tips and tricks for was a website that gives tips and hints, and also some cheats available for different games. I was inspired to look for this based on one of the rules in the Trivia Crack subreddit, which said that you weren't allowed to discuss any cheats or hacks for the game. And I kind of thought, well, I couldn't believe there actually was cheats or hacks out there for Trivia Crack. So I did some searching, discovered this website. I didn't end up using any, but there are a few out there. Then I spent a lot of time on the Trivia Crack Wikipedia page, especially early on in my gameplay, when I was just curious on finding out how to play the game. There wasn't a lot of great tutorials within the app or the game itself, so I was just looking for a rule book. And the Trivia Crack Wikipedia page here had some very detailed information on how to actually maneuver through the game, how to work with different lives, accumulate coins, etc., etc. So it was very useful. But the one thing I did kind of question the entire time was, what's the accuracy of the information actually like that's in here? Lastly, I started to engage and at least follow the Trivia Crack Twitter page, which ended up leading me just by kind of searching through the tweets and replies between people and the Trivia Crack account, was the idea of selling an account. Now, I had never in my life, as somebody who's not a gamer, really thought about the idea that you could sell your online profile or your game profile to somebody else and actually try and turn a profit off something like this. I'd heard about it in, some intense role-playing games like World of Warcraft and things like that. You just hear people talking about it. But the idea of selling a profile on Trivia Crack, it kind of blew my mind like this. And then so I followed that link from the Twitter to subreddit here and kind of found out some information. And you find somebody that's like, I'm on level 317 with 1 million coins, 1,075 diamonds. Like, why would anybody want to buy that? Because at that point, you're pretty much maxed out in the gameplay. What's the purpose? If you can, not cheat your way to a victory, but pay your way there through second chances with coins. You already own all the cards. It just didn't make sense. Like, what's the fun of the game at that point? It's like, getting to the final boss in Mario and then getting a video recap of your entire gameplay. Like, why would you continue to play if you've already beat it and accomplished it? But apparently that's something people do, is they were literally asking to sell their game profile for a free game available. So good to know that kind of stuff was out there as well. G and Hayes Affinity Space Principle number 3. Newbies and masters and everyone else share a common space. This described me to a T when I first started lurking around the subreddit, but I quickly noticed that there were people of all levels of gameplay here during my time, and that everybody was accepted. G and Hayes Affinity Space Principle number 4. Everyone can, if they wish, produce and not just consume. I feel like the rules of this affinity space on subreddit really allow for a safe environment for all the individuals to pose questions and make contributions, very much like the sim spaces described by G and Hayes during an earlier cycle in the course. G and Hayes Affinity Space Principle number 11. There are many different routes to status. People on the Trivia Crack subreddit would constantly post about how big their stats were or how much they had earned during the game. Or they would ask others if, hey, are my stats good? And I felt that that led to the affinity space status not always being about how much you contribute to that community, but how much time you devoted to actually playing the game itself. I feel like the discovery of affinity spaces has allowed me to understand that there's help out there. There are others who are experiencing what I am going through, and that it's okay not to know the answer for everything. I've learned that there are affinity spaces out there for everything, and I can't emphasize that aspect enough. But not all of the affinity spaces are created equally or afford participants the same comforts, rules, or experiences. You get out what you put in, and your view of the value of the affinity space is totally based on your perceptions about what is meaningful content and what are the acceptable norms.